Of course, he's a British businessman, founder of WPP, the world's largest advertising and PR group. Very well-known person in the business world. Sir Martin joins us now in the studio. Thanks for being with us today. How you doing?
Good early morning.
I know.
On the weekend, working on the weekend.
We got you out of bed early.
7 day week.
I apologize for that.
With jet lag.
You know, you're no stranger, though, to working late hours and long weeks.
No.
So there you go.
How long have you been in Singapore on this trip?
I got here on Tuesday.
Okay.
So I've had a few days to adjust.
Non-stop meetings, conferences?
Pretty much, yeah. They got me working 24/7.
And you're here with Monks, right?
That's right. So Monks is our operating brand, not just here, but in 33 countries. Mm-hmm. We have about 7,000 people. We started about 6 years ago. We have about $1 billion of revenue. We're a purely digital, data-driven, which in an AI age is even more relevant than it was when we started 6 years ago. We go to market as faster, better, cheaper. As we argue whether we should use the word cheaper or not, but more efficient. But we think in an AI age, a technology-driven age, that's pretty important. And we've added, because of AI, because we can do things on greater scale and more, so faster, better, cheaper, and more. And last but not least, we're a unitary brand, one brand, whereas at WPP, for example, we'd be multi-branded. So Monks is the operating brand. We started as two companies, Media Monks and Mighty Hive, and then we attached about 16 companies to each of those in a fairly short period of time, and then added a division around tech services. So what we do is content creation, digital content creation, data and digital media, so digital media planning and buying and data analysis, and then digital transformation.
When you think back, when you first came into the advertising world, in late 60s or 70s, right? Sort of a Mad Men era, if you will.
Yeah, well, Don Draper was a little bit before me.
A little bit before.
But actually, the Mad Men series was pretty lifelike. There were strains of it, male-dominated, a bit anti-Semitic, waspish,
all of that.
If I'm allowed to use those.
Of course,
phrases.
absolutely.
But in those days, so a bit misogynistic, and an industry which was very, very, very traditional. In fact, in one episode, if you remember, the creative lounge or the creative studio was replaced by an IBM data. I think it was data storage. No, it was a computer unit, IBM computer unit. So
took up the
that
whole room.
Symbolized, you got rid of the creatives and you moved the machine in it.
Yeah.
So
well,
actually, it resonates.
I'm interested in the arc of that history of that journey for you.
Yeah.
Especially being at WPP, one of the largest, ad and PR
Well,
firms.
it was the largest.
The
no
largest.
Longer, yeah.
There you go. And now, as you're moving into the AI world with Monks and doing this, what does that transformational arc look like aside from the technology itself?
There are two fundamental trends. If it answers the question, that really sort of fashioned what I did at Saatchi's before, because I was CFO of Saatchi's before I started WPP in '85, and then we started Monks S4 in 2018. There are two fundamental trends. Firstly, globalization. So there was a famous professor at Harvard Business School called Ted Levitt, who wrote an article in 1983 in the Harvard Business Review that consumers would consume everything in the same way everywhere. So that was one trend, and that drove Saatchi's and that drove WPP. And then in the late 90s, the other trend, which is technology and great changes in technology, primarily the internet boom or the internet change, deployment, plus then smartphones, and now, of course, AI, technological development. And that fashioned WPP and has totally fashioned what we're doing at S4 and Monks. So those are the two trends, if that's your arc.
Right.
Those are the two transformational trends. And actually, technology and geography, or geography and technology, I think drive everything we do, whether it's political, economic, or business. But you think about it, those two things that are going on. I mean, Trump tariffs, if you think about that, that's going to be fashioned by geography and technology. So those two two trends are really the fundamentals.
Yeah.
Speaking of trends, I'm fascinated to know through your vast experience. Obviously, you started in the UK, grew up in West London, I believe.
No, not West London. I grew in the Jewish ghetto in Golders Green, which Northwest London.
Northwest London, yes. So you grew up in Northwest London. What are the differences between advertising PR in the West as opposed to Asia? Or is advertising just advertising?
No, it's. I think I would make a distinction between what happens in China and maybe what happens outside. So the Chinese ecosystem is very different. The digital ecosystem and the Chinese advertising system is very different to outside. If you think about the big platforms, there are 6 major platforms. Clients spend about $1 trillion on advertising. About $700 billion is in digital now, so 70%, and about $300 billion in traditional. That's free-to-air TV, radio, not so much digital radio, but traditional radio, outdoor, etc., magazines and press. Digital is growing at around 10 to 15%. Traditional is declining at 0 to 15%, depending on whether you have live sports or not. If you have live sports, it's a little bit less depressed or less going. So the 700 billion is dominated by 6. The digital piece, and indeed the whole piece, is dominated by 6 platforms. 3 Western, that's Alphabet, which has about 250 billion in advertising. Meta about 150 billion, and Amazon about 60, and TikTok outside China about 40. And then in China and in the East, and particularly in China, Alibaba, Tencent, and ByteDance. ByteDance does about a total of 150, which I mentioned 40 is outside China, and 110 is in China. Those 6 platforms dominate. Now, other tech companies dominate digital or dominate media. Apple does ad revenues about 11 billion. Microsoft about 19 billion. Nvidia doesn't do ad revenues, but obviously with the production of chips, dominates it. And then you've got sort of three software companies, really, Salesforce, Adobe, and Oracle, that dominate. So it's very concentrated. Twitter gets a lot of airtime, or X, and Musk obviously gets a lot of airtime. But in terms of ad revenues, when Musk took over Twitter, it was doing about 5 billion. It's now shrunk to about 2 billion. So these are relatively small. Pinterest's about 4, Snap's about 5 or 6. So they're relatively small. And I go through those stats just to demonstrate how forceful and dominant. So if you think about it, the 4 Western platforms that I mentioned, including Twitter and Alphabet, Meta, and Amazon, account for about half of total advertising, the trillion, and about 70% of the digital. So very dominant platforms. Obviously, that caused regulators heartburn. But I'm not sure that it's really interesting.
Well, Meta right now is in the middle of an antitrust
well, so is Google.
And
but
Google,
it's interesting you say that. President Xi, there was a little bit of a spat with Jack Ma a few years ago. I mean, he's now been rehabilitated.
Apparently.
But if you remember, President Xi did say he was going to cut up Alibaba into, or the regulatory authority in China cut it up into 8 or so pieces. Hasn't happened. Why is that? And I think it's for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think President Xi and the Politburo understand the importance of big tech to a country and its strength and development. And also from a defense point of view, and dare I say even from an offensive point of view, when you see what's happening in the Middle East, you see what's happening in Ukraine, you see what's happening in conflicts, in modern conflicts, technology is hugely important. Think of Starlink and Musk in the context of Ukraine. For example, hugely important in terms of defense and offense. So big tech, I think, so I have a little bit of a vested interest and I'm subjective, is here to stay. I don't think the regulator is very difficult to catch up, but I think big tech is here to stay. The other thing, of course, is that AI demands huge capital investment. Our biggest client is Alphabet at Monks. Our second biggest client is, I'm not allowed to say publicly because we're NDA, but a major telecoms company, one of the most valuable companies in the world. President Trump occasionally gets interested in, so you can think about who I'm talking about. Meta, Amazon, T-Mobile, Disney, Netflix, those sorts of companies. These are companies that are really investing very heavily in AI and storage capacity and data capacity and AI itself. In fact, what is known as the Mag 7, or what we now call the MAGA 7, companies like Amazon and Alphabet, etc. These companies are investing about $500 billion a year. Amazon invests $100 billion a year. Google and Meta, who we were with this week here in Singapore, $75 billion each in building AI capacity. So the point of the story is those platforms that I mentioned that are so dominant are, in my view, going to continue their dominance because of the capital need inside the industry. Yeah. The other thing, just finally to say, is the two qualities that are demanded to be successful in an AI world are data and distribution. When you think about who has the data, who has the distribution, it's those platforms I mentioned. So their position is getting reinforced.
We're talking with Sir Martin Sorrell, the founder and executive chairman of S4 Capital, and Monks, a digital-first marketing, technology services, and consulting company. Let's talk about people, because many people are getting left behind. You talk about the valuations of these companies, and the people at the top are obviously making a great deal of money. But the workers themselves, the people that are involved in making AI happen and making digital transformation happen, are increasingly concerned about their position in the world. Is technology going to take over their job?
I don't think it's actually.
So tell us how you feel about that.
I don't think it's actually so much the people in the technology companies. It's the people outside it's more the people in the traditional industry.
But there's been huge layoffs in the tech companies, though.
Well,
over the last 5 years, right?
That's for different reasons. I think that was because of overexpansion during COVID. I mean, benefit 2020 hindsight.
Sure,
it's easy to say that. No, I think the fundamental issue goes a bit deeper than that. I mean, if you think about the rise of populism, it's not just Trump. For example, in the UK, the most popular person at the moment, from a political point of view, probably is
Nigel Farage.
Yes, I mean, God forbid he becomes prime minister. But anyway, Nigel Farage, as I call him, because actually when he was at Dulwich College, his name was Farage. It suddenly magically changed to Farage. Sounds a little bit more
a bit softer,
media friendly, a little bit more sonny. But if you go back to the 1980s, when Reagan and Thatcher, really. I don't think Reagan revolutionized the U.S. economy, but he certainly did accelerate its growth. And you could argue that Margaret Thatcher revolutionized the U.K. economy, certainly from a growth point of view. What happened was capital as a proportion of labor started to increase, as a proportion of GDP started to increase. Labor as a proportion of GDP started to decline. Ray Dalio, the hedge fund manager, has wonderful charts. I think you should look at them. Everybody should look at them because they tell you a lot about the way the world was developing. And he points to this trend to inequality, and that's what you're getting at, I think. And the other trend, of course, that Trump has capitalized on from a political point of view is the discontent caused by globalization. Globalization has hollowed out manufacturing jobs in the, let's say, developed economies of the West, US and Western Europe. My view, having struggled with economics at school, university, is that this is a sort of almost a natural economic phenomenon. Over time, economies ebb and flow. China was, in the early 19th century, the world's biggest economy. It's been on the wrong side of history for a couple hundred years. It may well be on the right side of history for the next 100 years. So, 100 years. What Trump has done is capitalized on that. And in a sense, in a funny way, AI will deliver what Trump wants. But I think the end result is not what he wants. And let me just explain it a little bit. What AI is doing is hollowing out the manual jobs, or will hollow out in America. So, for example, we are already seeing a decline in some of the revenues of the outsourcing companies in India, because what was happening was that high-priced labor jobs were switching to India because it was lower price, and other countries. But with AI, you can mechanize, you can automate the bottom of the pyramid of U.S. manufacturing, but you replace it not with people,
Right.
you replace it with bots.
Right. Technology.
So he'll get what he wants, but in my view, he'll get the replacement being done by automation, which will not solve what he wants.
Right.
I think what America has to become is a more sophisticated service economy. I don't think it's a question of manufacturing. We'll see how it breaks
And every
out in time.
reasonable economist has been saying that already for years, and it's just Trump is
Yeah, but I
tied
think-
to this idea of building things, making things, screwing screws in iPhones. And
Yeah, but
things,
I think
right?
the point that you're
Yeah.
pointing to is a really, really important and good one, which is that the inequality is the issue. It's this divide, not so much in the tech companies, but in the more traditional companies where people are concerned. And of course, in America, it's very interesting actually. But I think there have been 6 books written about the inflexibility of the workforce in America because of the lack of housing at economic prices. So if you're in the Rust Belt, and Detroit or somewhere, and you're locked in to a low rental, or a house that you've had traditionally, and you want to buy a house in California or Texas or Florida or wherever it is, it's expensive. Supply of housing and pricing of housing, is if it's high, is a deterrent to mobility. In the UK, it was slightly different. The way that you insured yourself against adversity from a financial point of view was buying a house and having a house as an asset. It would grow in price, and
It was your biggest asset for
that
many
would be
people.
your biggest house
Yep.
and biggest wealth.
Yep.
And you would have a mortgage in order that actually rooted you as well. I mean, that made you less mobile. So it's labor mobility, training as also education as the part of it. If you have industries that ebb and flow or rise and fall, one of the most important things you have to do is you have to have retraining, reskilling programs to get manufacturing workers into service businesses or whatever it happens to be. So I think it's more complex. But what's really interesting is that politicians have capitalized, whether it's Trump, Farage, or whoever, have capitalized on these trends in order to make political capital.
Let's talk about your industry itself, advertising. I've got many friends who work in it. From the creative standpoint, writers, copy editors, photographers, illustrators, they're all saying their work is being impacted negatively by AI. And if you look at advertising on a broader philosophical level, what is it? It's human beings selling stuff to other human beings, trying to convince them that this is what human beings want. In many ways, there's nothing more human than the advertising industry. How does AI fit into that?
Well, I think I think that's dare I say, I'm 80 years old, so I think that's an old. This is an old man saying that you have an old view of the world.
Not my view. Not my view.
No, but you see the same thing. They said that those people that you're referring to said the same thing about data. There's nothing more than we love than having our monks having done 3 months of hard work, going in, making a pitch, and for somebody to say, "I'll buy it." And they loathe the idea that the client didn't say, "No, I'll buy it, but I need some data to substantiate it." So it was the same thing about data. Look, these machines will aid creativity. And let me give you the flip side. We're seeing huge impact of AI on visualization and copywriting, which you're saying, compacting, reducing the time to market. So, for example, we have produced it's quite well known in the industry. About 2 months ago, we produced a 30-second TV ad for Puma, sports company, which historically would have cost about $2 or $3 million and taken about 2 or 3 months to produce. It cost us $200,000, and we produced it, I think, within 12 days. I mean, people are uncomfortable about that because agencies sell on the basis of time. Well, what you have to do is to adjust the way you charge to outputs. So we get a retainer. have your full-time employees paid for, but in addition, make sure you get paid on output.
So
you
the
have to
business
change-
model needs to
has
change.
to change, exactly. So visualization and copywriting, that's one thing that's going to change. And people are uncomfortable with change. I mean, people hate change in a way, and like to keep on doing what they've been doing for years. So that's one thing. Second thing is personalization at scale. Sort of work that we do for Netflix, where we personalize assets. We might, in a campaign like Squid Games or Narcos, we might create about 1.5 million assets. Now we can do it on a multiple of that. So that's the second area. Media planning and buying, that $1 trillion I referred to of ad revenues, that should be done algorithmically. It should not be done manually, because machines, actually, the human mind cannot go through all the various permutations. The human mind can take the output from the algorithm and then decide and evaluate which is the best alternative. That actually aids the 25-year-old media planner or buyer. There will be fewer of them, to your point, but that aids them in getting it done better. General efficiency, like we're doing in outside broadcasting with NVIDIA, AWS, and Adobe, where we can reduce the cost of outside broadcast by 80 or 90%. And then finally, and I think this is really powerful, democratizing knowledge inside companies. Everybody knowing what's going on. You know, Alphabet is our largest client. We have about 700 people working on Alphabet around the world. If you can instantly inform them we had a meeting with Sanjay, who runs Google in APAC, whilst we were here in Singapore, or Dan Neary and his recently announced successor, Joe Benjamin, here for Meta, running APAC. If we can say to the people who work on Meta, people who work on Google, this is what we were discussing, or here's the session, or here's what we learned from it, instantly, you really change the dynamics of organizations. You flatten the levels, you make it much more democratic as well. These are all huge benefits. And going back to your colleagues in the industry, who are understandably fearful of it.
I mean, they're losing jobs.
Well, no, not yet.
Copywriters,
Not yet. No, but look,
like that?
here's the thing. So there was a very famous economist called John Maynard Keynes,
Of course. Yeah.
who wrote a pamphlet, I think it was in 1930, on the impact of automation.
Right.
And his conclusion was we were going to have more holidays. Okay. That was in 1930, so 100 or so years ago. So I think he was right, 100 years too late. I mean, I think there is that the result of AI will be a reduction of employment overall, let's say in our industry. Okay, that will free up people in terms of time within the industry. And it comes back to what I said before. If you get these changes, you have to reskill, and you have to have a much more fluid workforce. I mean, my dad said to me, find an industry you enjoy, find a company within it, and, spend your life in it, right? His time frame was from 20 to 60.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
It's changed. Longevity may actually even, the sort of developments in medical science maybe will live even beyond the averages today, maybe quite significantly so. So we will have to get used to multiple careers and multiple companies and multiple changes in our lives.
So do you see it as
It's
industry...
much more fluid.
But some say it's not just an industry change, it's an existential crisis. This isn't a blacksmith being replaced by the Ford motor car. This is the entire mode of transport being changed.
In every change that went through, so the printing press or whatever, everybody said we were going to be able to work. I happen to believe that this one, I sort of agree with your friends that it will actually reduce, in our industry, the demand for jobs. Take media planning and buying. There are about 250,000 people involved in it, but they are doing stuff manually, and that is unproductive, and machines will be able to do it. The existential threat you refer to is, in my view, much more sinister. It's not about jobs. The existential threat is AI in the hands of bad actors, right? Yeah. And there's a lot of people who believe that we've gone beyond the tipping point already on that the opportunity for government control or concerted or integrated government control of AI has gone. That moment, rather like nuclear. Not everybody's seen Oppenheimer, but the film. But it's that same issue. We managed to do it with nuclear to some, not totally, but to a major extent. And in a way, AI is nuclear technology as well, but in a different form. And there will be bad actors, and in the hands of bad actors, it can be. We've already seen examples of attempts at fraud, successful attempts at fraud, and manipulation politically, as well as in business. So I think that's I think it's Geoffrey Hinton was one of the founders of DeepMind, which is one of the AI companies the AI company that Google bought in 2014. Geoffrey Hinton resigned, one of the founders, recently. I think he's now a professor at the Canadian University, because he was worried about the existential threat of AI. I think that's the existential threat. I don't think so. I think there are so many things happening from a sort of scientific, medical, environmental point of view that are pluses that maybe job creation totally will be different. Our industry maybe not, but different. So I'm not so concerned about that. I am concerned about what we're talking about in the context of Hinton.
We're talking with Sir Martin Sorrell, founder and executive chairman of S4 Capital and Monks. We have time for just one more question or comment from you, and that is, I'd like to bring us to sort of a macro look at what's going on in the world right now. In the last 3 months, the global trade system's been upended. This obviously would impact your industry as much as anybody else. What's your feeling about where we're at right now and the long-term, perhaps, impact, positive or negative, on what's going on with the global economy and what we can expect going forward?
Well, there are three big political issues: U.S., China, Russia, Ukraine, or it's U.S., China, Russia. Let's put Russia rather than just Ukraine, because I think President Putin's ambitions go beyond Ukraine itself, and then finally Iran, whose ambitions in the Middle East, or nuclear ambitions, we all know about. Those three things. I mean, I don't want to depress people on a Saturday morning. We should be there to try and cheer. I think they're almost.
You've got the benefit of
a number of decades. Maybe it's not a benefit. Maybe the less you know, the better it is.
Yeah, true.
But I think they're all immutable problems. So I think it's very difficult. I think U.S., China, despite what happened in Geneva last weekend, which was good news, will bifurcate. Will split further. I think it was, I won't say who it was, but it was a senior diplomat in China, American diplomat, said the relationship between the U.S. and China is structurally competitive. I was in Beijing last year. And I think that's true. So that's one thing. Russia, Ukraine, I think Putin's ambitions are huge. And even if he wasn't there, I think the replacement might even be tougher to deal with. And then finally, Iran. A little bit more optimistic about the Middle East, but I think it's still fundamental issue.
Is the Trump strategy the right one right now?
Well, you layer on top of that tariffs. Yeah. What tariffs have done is inject even more uncertainty in the situation.
Right.
If you went back to January, post the November election, there was euphoria in the U.S. business community and around the world, actually. You saw it at Davos. Davos is the opposite bellwether to everything. I mean, everybody was euphoric, and here we are 3 months later, and we're in the depths of depression. I think tariffs have created a huge uncertainty, but after we sort out the tariff base, whether it's 10%, 30%, 85%, or 145%, two things are going to happen. One is geographical fragmentation, so companies will choose countries on the basis of prospective growth rates. So places like Singapore and Malaysia, places like China, India, APAC as a whole, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand. These countries, I think, are in an extremely good position. Latin America, I'm very bullish on. I'm actually bullish on North America, even with these tremors. And the Middle East. Africa, there's too volatile, too many conflicts. The macro is too difficult to deal with. Micro, you do it on a micro basis. And Europe is in deep doo-doo. UK is not in a good place. France is not in a good place. Italy and Spain are not in
Germany,
a good place.
yeah, it goes on.
Germany may be better, more fiscal headroom, new chancellor, spending on defense is needed because the Americans won't bail us out like they used to. So that's one thing. The second thing, and I think this is really important from our point of view at Monks and at S4, is that after it gets sorted out, the world is going to grow more slowly. It's not going to grow at 3+, let's say. It's going to go at 3-. Inflation driven by the tariffs, but because inflation has been stubborn anyway before the tariffs came in, and interest rates are going to be higher than we have been used to for the last 30 or 40 years since Reagan and Thatcher. In that environment, technology becomes hugely important to improve efficiency. So going back to your point, those creatives that should be using the technology to increase productivity, increase efficiency for their clients, because that's going to be critical. Take Europe, where our clients look at it as being a cost issue, not a revenue issue because of the lack of growth. What they will be doing is using AI hugely to improve efficiency. And it's not just AI, it's the metaverse, it's blockchain,
Web3,
it's quantum computing, and God knows what. So I think actually, from a technological point of view, there are huge opportunities because of that efficiency gain.
Awesome. Sir Martin, we do have to leave it there.
Thank you very much.
I want to thank you so much,
Thank
Sir
you,
Martin
guys.
Sorrell, the founder and
It's amazing to
executive
be with somebody from Dagenham and Chicago.
There you go.
Wow.
We're
The
happy.
world is a small place.
It is indeed.
Getting smaller all the way. Sir Martin Sorrell, founder and executive chairman of S4 Capital. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Money FM 89.3.